This month on In the Life.
What it takes to catch the eye of a guy walking down Castro Street is liable to raise an eyebrow in Washington.
I can't describe the boost and the rush I got after starting the protease inhibitors.
Now that we have the new medications and we're looking at people living longer, the rules have changed.
My doctor said, I can give you a normal life expectancy.
All this and more on America's Gay and Lesbian News Magazine. Funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, and these funders, and the annual support of In the Life members like you. Welcome to In the Life. I'm Wilson Cruz, and I'm happy to be back to host this evening's program. Tonight, as a way of marking the 25th year of HIV/AIDS, In the Life returns to its archives to revisit stories that highlight the changing face of this disease. I was only 8 when AIDS was first acknowledged in 1981. But later on, as a gay teenager, I became more aware of this devastating disease. I knew that many people, especially in the gay community, were dying, and it frightened me. But 10 years ago, I remember the excitement and hope I felt when news of the first antiretroviral drugs hit the press. Tonight's first segment takes us back to that crucial turning point in 1996, when In the Life covered the promise and hope of these new drugs.
Rock Hudson, Eddie Peterson, Cindy Gerando.
Thornton Wells.
So many names, so many quilts. We may remember 1996 as the last year this mall could hold them all, but it also was a year of hope for some people still living with AIDS. Vancouver, Canada, the 11th International Conference on AIDS. No big breakthroughs, but a major advance in AIDS therapy, the so-called pharmaceutical cocktail, a mixture of drugs, old and new, that for some patients seems to work.
We are seeing incredible results in terms of these drugs bringing down the level of virus in the body and also keeping patients alive healthier and longer.
The therapy combines 2 older drugs like AZT or 3TC that prevent healthy cells from becoming infected with a new class of drugs called protease inhibitors that stop already infected cells from producing new HIV.
So the rationale is if we take both of those drugs in combination, both nucleoside analogs and protease inhibitors, you're basically blocking HIV production from 2 sides.
I can't describe the boost and the rush I got in the month after starting the protease inhibitors.
For John Hatchett, 1996 is ending a lot better than it began. Last December, hospitalized for bacterial meningitis and a reoccurrence of lymphoma, he began 6 months of intensive chemotherapy.
I was sick as a dog. I lost 15 pounds. I was on constant IV antibiotics for most of the holidays. And then in early January, probably related to the chemo, had severe anemia, collapsed here, did the whole ambulance back to the hospital trip. I stopped working, I resigned from my job. It really felt to me like I was entering some kind of last few years, last couple of years. I thought maybe 2 at the most.
Mentally, emotionally, you were preparing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
In March, John developed cryptosporidiosis, which did not respond to treatment. He continued to go downhill. In May, with some skepticism, he began the new combination therapy.
Within 2.5 weeks after adding the protease, my cryptosporidium symptoms stopped completely. Literally one day they were there, the next day they were gone. I could feel day to day an improvement in my strength, in my energy level. My sex drive started to come back.
In June, John Hatchett headed for Vancouver, the the virus now undetectable in his blood. What was it like to be in Vancouver and hear all these encouraging medical reports and realize they were talking about you?
Indeed. There were several times when I wanted to jump up from my seat and, you're right, yes, this is happening. I'm proof, Frankly, the only sort of damper on that was just knowing personally of people who were not having the kind of response I was.
Some people have such serious side effects that they can't take them, and others simply don't respond to the drugs in the way that one hopes.
They're difficult to use also. The one I'm on, for example, has to be taken on a particular schedule in relation to food, so you have to adjust your eating schedule around that.
And no one can say for sure how long the new drug therapies will work, or even if the clinical results tell the whole story.
We see that these cocktails bring down the level of virus in the blood dramatically, but we need to understand that only about 4% of the virus is actually in the blood. 96% of it is in the lymph nodes and is in the gut and is in the brain, which are major reservoirs for HIV.
Still, for many people with AIDS who would like to at least try protease inhibitors, there are more basic obstacles.
My particular price tag is $47,000 a year for my combination of triple dose sequinavir, AZT, 3GC, acyclovir, and my other non-HIV medications.
It costs tens of thousands of dollars a year to be on this, and most people simply cannot afford it. The other problem is access. Can people get it? And most of the people with HIV or AIDS cannot get these medicines, both in this country and around the world.
Some people in developing countries cannot even afford aspirin. In this country alone, because so many patients with HIV and AIDS do rely on things like AIDS drug assistance programs and Medicaid. Both of those programs that are available are still very iffy as to whether or not they do cover the protease inhibitors and whether or not they will cover all of these drugs in combination.
And more critically, we're finding a real strong groundswell of opposition on the part of some components within the HIV/AIDS community to making those drugs available to less privileged persons than themselves.
Jean Bergman of New York's Housing Works. Her clients come from the African American and Latino communities, HIV positive, homeless, living in poverty. Some have drug addictions or suffer mental illness. People for whom taking medication on a strict regimen can be even more difficult.
And the fear is that if the drugs aren't taken correctly, that new and mutant strains of HIV will develop, which will further endanger the health of people who are already infected and also potentially pose a public health hazard. And that's become an excuse for denying protease inhibitors to large segments of the community that is already affected by and infected with HIV.
Consider this prediction from the Harvard AIDS Institute. By the year 2000, more than half of all AIDS cases in the U.S. will be among African Americans.
Protease has done a lot for us, but it hasn't done anything to the classism, sexism, racism, homophobia that have been so much a part of AIDS since the beginning. And those are still our battles. They have to be. Otherwise, a purely medical, even a cure, is really not going to have meaning for most of the people with HIV in the world.
Which brings us back to Washington, where during Quilt Weekend, hundreds of AIDS activists were confronting all these issues in different ways. A mock funeral at the White House.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we've surrounded half of the building at this point.
A human chain around the Capitol to demand more leadership from elected officials.
More action now!
A demonstration against pharmaceutical companies and their drug prices. And the candlelight vigil. A lot of anger, a lot of emotion, at least for this day. But where does AIDS activism go from here?
I think the big problem in much of AIDS activism right now is nobody knows where to focus. As treatment has changed, a lot of energy has gone in that direction, and yet the issues of access to treatment for so many people is really the key issue, and a lot of people are moving in that direction. And so there's unfortunately, a little scatteredness to the activist movement right now.
If you look at, say, ACT UP New York and find it smaller than it was a couple of years ago, it's because all those people have spread out to other agencies, other lobbying groups, and the work goes on in an activist way, but in different forms.
I think what we'll find is a lot more linkages between activism around HIV and other illnesses and disabilities with activism around race, and especially around poverty and welfare issues.
Price gouging pharmaceuticals are one of our targets. Needle exchange, pushing that is big. And the prevention message is still very homogenized. It's still it's like glossy advertising. There is no urgency to it. People are getting infected still every day by the thousands.
And at year's end, a look ahead to 1997.
A realistic dream is that we have the president talking about this much more loudly and really helping the American people understand that there is still an emergency epidemic going on.
I'm afraid I think the future is pretty grim. I think that with the consequences of the Welfare Act gradually filtering down, what we'll see is an increase in poverty and homelessness, an increase in HIV infection rates, as well as in other public health problems.
For 1997, I would like to see that we can at least keep HIV a manageable infection, manageable in the sense of diabetes, where you are never really officially cured of the disease, but you can live your life as healthy as possible.
And for John Hatchett, there are dreams again.
One of my fondest fantasies of myself in a year is living in Italy with my lover, doing work similar to what I've done here. If I end up staying in New York, I see myself in a bigger apartment. That's it.
And so, 15 years into the epidemic, AIDS continues to haunt us, even as it inspires us with everyday examples of compassion and courage.
The basic principle of HIV treatment, a 3-drug cocktail, is the same today as it was 10 years ago. But today, there are 20 such drugs to choose from. We've learned in the last 10 years that long-term use of these medications can have serious side effects, creating liver and kidney problems, nerve damage, and increased fats in the blood. And there's still no standard method to deal with these side effects, so treatment is often by trial and error. Does HIV/AIDS alter the aging process? Does the virus make certain diseases more likely to take hold or more difficult to treat? In the early days of the epidemic, few in the medical world ever contemplated the issue of growing old with this disease. But effective drug treatments have made this a compelling new subject to tackle. 2 years ago, In the Life met with some HIV-positive patients who were the early pioneers entering middle and old age. Their experiences may provide crucial clues to researchers.
Philadelphia is much more than home to Bert. His family settled here in the 17th century, so it was only natural that he developed a love for history and, as a result, antiques. So much so that he opened his own shop not far from the neighborhood known as Antique Row.
And I had enough money to start my own business, and I thought it was about time to get out on my own, which I did in 1987. Had the shop for 15 years.
But today, that's all a distant memory. Bert, who says he was infected around 1990 and was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS 5 years ago, was forced to close the shop shortly after he got sick.
10 years ago, I was a middle-class gay man, and now I live below the poverty level.
Unfortunately, Bert's story is not uncommon. It's a cruel twist on what many think of as one of the greatest medical developments of our time. HIV is becoming more a long-term chronic condition than an immediate death sentence. But now that many people with HIV are living literally decades after diagnosis, there are long-term implications, not just financial, but medical and social as well.
I used to think of myself as a dinosaur, being the age that I am and still being alive when all of my contemporaries and my friends are dead, basically. I now think of myself more as an endangered species.
But being alive longer is nothing that people like Bert, now 56 years old, ever planned on.
Now that we have the new medications and we're looking at people living longer, the rules have changed.
Dr. Margaret Chesney is Deputy Director of the National Institutes of Health's Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. One of her specialties is HIV.
People spent down the money that they had, and then in the midst of doing that, they discovered these new medications, and people's life trajectory changed dramatically. It was as though someone opened a whole new chapter of their life, but they didn't have the resources to help fund that chapter.
That'll give you your demographic, like,
Bert is trying to fund his chapter by working part-time at Philadelphia Fight, an AIDS services organization.
I'm on 10 medications for 4 or 5 conditions.
Fewer than half of those prescription drugs are for AIDS. The others, heart disease, high cholesterol, arthritis, gout, and depression. That's another big piece of the puzzle for those growing older with AIDS, dealing with the conditions that typically come along with aging: side effects, frequent changing of regimens because one drug doesn't work well with another, and never really knowing whether a symptom is AIDS-related or age-related.
The old joke is that if you hang by your fingernails long enough, you get used to it. 5 years of these things, I've become used to them.
We've only been watching this disease for about 20 years. We've only had some of the answers, maybe 10. Look straight over my shoulder.
Dr. Veronica Jenkins runs a practice that handles well over 1,000 patients in Washington, D.C. On this day, Brenda Carpenter is in for a checkup. HIV positive, 68 years old, and also dealing with 5 other conditions, many age-related.
We're seeing things that we've never seen before. And in combination with HIV disease, the picture is definitely muddled. It's very gray.
The other concern, the long-term effects of the newer medicines for HIV, particularly protease inhibitors.
We didn't understand the quality of life that living longer would cause them to have as a result of the medicine.
And for people like Bert, that means lingering fears.
I've had the occasional scare where I've had tests done for liver function and kidney function, where there were indications of elevated toxicities in both my liver and kidneys.
So Dr. Jenkins and others are calling for more research and more physician training in these areas, primarily because of statistics like this one. A survey of 330 primary care physicians found that 40%, nearly half, report rarely or never asking patients over 50 about HIV.
Unfortunately, there are examples where people came to their primary care clinicians. They were seniors, and they said, I think I really ought to take one of those HIV tests. And the doctor discouraged them and said, oh, no, don't. For someone like you, oh, don't worry about it.
That's in part because the early warning signs of HIV, like fatigue, loss of appetite, flu-like symptoms, and confusion, are also common to many age-related conditions. So some say the estimate that seniors represent 11% of all HIV cases in this country may actually be too low. Dr. Cynthia Gibert is among those clinicians on the front lines of the aging with AIDS battle.
Now I think there is more concern that people may die from the comorbidities of aging rather than the complications of HIV.
Dr. Gibert and a team at the Veterans Affairs Medical Centers are recruiting 6,000 older people for a 6-year study.
To make a comparison between aging veterans who have HIV versus those who do not have HIV.
And that's not all. The graying of the AIDS epidemic is gaining attention from many circles. Researchers, who have just published the first ever edition of a medical journal devoted entirely to HIV in people middle-aged and older. Survivors, who have formed groups like the National Association of HIV Over 50. NAHOF just held its 5th annual conference in Scottsdale, Arizona. And advocates like SHIP, the Senior HIV Intervention Project, a unique program based in Florida that reaches out to those 50+ through the web, educational materials, counseling, and testing.
I was diagnosed in the summer of 1986. It's a time that I refer to as the time when the sun fell out of the sky.
Today, Michael St. Andrews is 53. Though he's been dealing with HIV for 17 years, he's just now adjusting to the conditions of aging as well, like the diabetes diagnosis he was recently given.
So I've got diabetes, I have hypertension, and I have high cholesterol. And so all of those things are being dealt with at the same time in combination with the therapies that I take for the HIV.
When it comes to medication, people like Michael have quite a balancing act on their hands.
How do these highly effective antiretrovirals act if you add in cardiovascular medications or medications for prostate cancer or other conditions? We just don't know.
I think a large part of the fact that I've remained as healthy as I have is because I've remained active, and it's been about an attitude.
It's a philosophy that many say comes with a second chance at life and needs to be put to good use.
When my doctor said, Wilder, I can give you a normal life expectancy, to me, that was almost as dramatic as given the HIV, positive test results originally. Hi, David.
He calls himself Wilder, just Wilder, the last name of his partner, Alan, who died from AIDS 6 years ago.
When you're not prepared to become old, you're not ready. So I'm not ready to be old. I'm just ready to be here now.
A stylist in Washington, D.C., Wilder is using the here and now to pass along some life lessons.
Well, it's not just safe sex, it's just like safe life.
Taking every opportunity with his clients.
Because HIV is such an elusive disease, you never know.
To talk about his HIV status and prevention.
And you never know if someone else is telling you the truth about who they are, so you always want to just protect yourself.
Wilder says he wonders if this is his fate, kept here to do some good as a long-term survivor.
For 22 years, I've lived with knowing that there may not be any tomorrow. And I've seen not only my lover, life partner, struck down, die in front of me, my friends shooting themselves, people jumping off of buildings and killing themselves in many different ways.
But Wilder doesn't sound as optimistic about the social impact of HIV and AIDS, and his concern is echoed by many long-term survivors. This is still a disease filled with stigma, and many say it's a misconception that those infected have a vast support system.
Nobody wants them. HIV-positive people are faced now with a kind of lonely future.
And that's not just an opinion. Take a look at the findings of a recent study done in New York City. ACREA, the AIDS Community Research Initiative of America, surveyed people with HIV who are in their late 40s to early 70s. 71% said they lived alone, and a majority reported having to do things for themselves because no one is available to help them out. Back in Philadelphia, Bird is trying to do his part to change that, at least in his community. It's called Positively Gay, and it's starting on the web.
An information site, a resource site, and also a social site so that gay HIV-positive men can get together and just be open and free with their diagnosis.
And be open and free with plans for the future. An unexpected pleasure and challenge for many of those over 50 with HIV.
Thinking about the future is something new for many of us, especially those of us who are older, because we really didn't think that there was going to be an old age.
We were so afraid of dying every day. Now we cannot be afraid of living.
8 years ago, In the Life traveled to the border crossing between San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Mexico, one of the busiest crossroads in the world. It's a place where commerce, prostitution, and an illicit drug market intersect, making it an ideal location for the potential transmission of HIV/AIDS. In this next segment, you will witness a remarkable grassroots organization in Tijuana called Activism. In 1989, 8 years into the AIDS epidemic, this group, operating on a shoestring budget, initiated an inventive way to get vital medication to those in need.
Many Americans come to Tijuana for sex, provided by men and women who sell their bodies, perhaps to feed a family or sometimes to feed a drug habit.
So much of the AIDS that we have down here can be attributed to Americans coming from California into this region and engaging in sexual, utilizing the services of the sex industry down here, which is a major industry in Tijuana.
Fred Scholl works as the volunteer pharmacologist at ACOSIDA, or Alliance Against AIDS, an AIDS outpatient clinic in Tijuana run by gay activists.
ACOSIDA was started in October 1989. For 8 years, it has been the only HIV clinic in Tijuana. It has never closed.
Currently, only 15% of ACOSIDA clients are gay men. 40% of the clients are heterosexual couples. But a closer look at Mexican culture may explain this trend.
A much higher percentage of men in Mexico have bisexual experiences than in the United States. And of course, that contributes to the AIDS situation because men can get infected with HIV and take it home to their wives. And that's a common scenario here.
No matter how people get infected with the HIV virus, getting treatment for any Mexican citizen always depends on access to money.
If the person has money, they can get treated in the United States. Or they can pay a private doctor who will charge a lot of money and may not help them as much, because doctors here are not up to par with the latest treatments. People without the financial means, the working class who go to the general hospital, are referred to government offices, and from there they send them here, to us.
ACOSIDA is the only clinic in Mexico that provides AIDS drugs to its patients free of charge. Drugs that are brought here from San Diego and elsewhere in the United States.
Let's say if I had AZT and I had a friend that needed AZT, and I gave that friend AZT in the U.S., I'd be committing a felony. If I donate it to a medical organization outside of the U.S., that's not violating the law. So what happens is this stuff is donated for use down here.
Ironically, the supply of life-giving drugs to ACOSIDA has depended on the death of Americans with AIDS.
It might be morbid, but we depend on people dying for our medicines, or that their medicines are changed. And prior to the protease inhibitors, we were not only providing medicines to this clinic, but we were providing medicines to clinics in Mexicali and in Guadalajara and in Mexico City. We had lots of medicines, and then all of a sudden they dried up because people were living. And I've worked with AIDS long enough that we have kind of we've developed a jaded attitude. We have seen every wonder cure. AZT was it, and then there was DDI, and then there was this, and then there was 3TC. Every one of those things have come along, and the virus has a way of adjusting. So we said, if things go the way they always have, we might have about 6 months, and people are going to start dying again. And you know what? That's happened. The studies have shown only about 50% of the people taking the protease inhibitors that it works with. The other 50% it doesn't. And so now we're getting a good supply again.
With a budget of just $12,000 a year and an all-volunteer staff, the clinic can only see patients once a week and has endured many hardships.
For a couple of years, we had no running water, and a lot of times we have had electrical problems. It really narrows down to a lot of priorities. This is why we don't have a cell telephone. This is why we don't have the latest technology in computers. That's why we don't have a lot of modern facilities, because we have to sort of make a budget throughout the year and then sort of live by it.
But volunteers at the clinic are fulfilled in other ways.
It's important for me because there are lots of people that one day, I'm not sure it can happen to them, but tomorrow or the day after, it could happen to any of my kids or to me. This is important to me because I can help not only the institution, but the patients.
While ACOSIDA provides much-needed help to the HIV community in Tijuana, the majority of those infected by the virus remain untreated. People with HIV are susceptible to tuberculosis, a disease that has hit epidemic proportions in Tijuana and is infecting more and more people across the border in San Diego as well.
You have a combination of AIDS and TB working together, which has a synergistic effect. And if you don't deal with it here, you're going to deal with it over there. And they already are starting. So it's just, infectious diseases don't respect borders.
This philosophy drives the work of many Americans and Mexicans who cross the border to fight AIDS.
This is really just one big metro area divided by a fence put up by the U.S. government. And it's a fence that runs right down the middle of my life. And I don't have any less human feelings for people who live on this side of the fence than who live on the San Diego side of the fence. And I wish that more people in San Diego felt the same way.
As far as me going up to different cities, I've been in California and even Oregon, New York, and in Canada, and talking about what we do down here and giving them the literature, that has been very, very successful, you know, and I think that once they hear our story, our struggle down here, I think the people will be able to help us out with the medication, because it's you know, for us, it's more important to have the medication than to have millions of dollars.
On our last day in Tijuana, we traveled down a dirt road to visit Casa Hogar de San Rafael, the only AIDS hospice in the city, run by Brother Armando Maya. The hospice is home to men and women who are in the final stages of AIDS and other terminal diseases.
Here, he has gotten a great deal of help from Brother Armando, medicine, food. He has received all kinds of attention. The little bit that Armando has, he shares.
The hospice needs other basic supplies, more food, more medicine, and more volunteers.
We are
only 2 people here, sometimes taking care of as many as 15 patients at a time, and we are not enough.
I have seen a lot of miracles here, and I've seen a lot of people very, very sick, and I've seen them get up. We have extended their lives, we have given them hope, and I think the hope that we give them with the medication, with the support, with the attention that we give them, even going to their houses and sharing the little they have, it's something emotional that sort of gets to your heart.
The Acosita Clinic is an excellent example of how a grassroots, community-based organization can do something when there's nothing happening at all. That's the only way that anybody in Tijuana with AIDS gets access to any antiretroviral drugs. Well, that's amazing. That's from no drugs to some people getting state-of-the-art treatment. Some people are on 3-drug combos with protease inhibitors. That would be unthinkable without the Acosita Clinic. It would be just a crazy dream.
Acosita continues its work in Tijuana. Its patients receive donations of the latest drug cocktails that are currently used in the United States. The drug crystal meth became a hit in the gay community, beginning in 1996, at the very moment when the antiretroviral medications for HIV/AIDS were dramatically extending lives. Also known as Tina and redneck cocaine, this drug is extremely cheap, easily accessible, and highly addictive. It can increase the risk of HIV/AIDS by erasing sexual inhibitions and creating physiological changes in the body that make transmission of the virus easier. Last year, In the Life met with 4 gay men who described the extreme highs and lows of this drug and their precarious struggles to leave it behind.
I start on Thursday night and, go to work high on Friday, Monday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe high on Monday, maybe high on Tuesday, maybe crashing on Tuesday, maybe sleeping through work on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. I had no idea this was out here for me. No idea. The worst thing I heard about crystal was that it was, it's a nasty drug and it's bad, and it's for the bad boys, and I'm like, ooh, I want to be bad.
My dad literally, tried to beat the homosexuality out of me for many years as a young kid. And you have all these people around you telling you that who you are can be changed or it needs to be corrected. And this really starts giving you, I think, a warped idea of your worth. So you go into a community which you think is going to be very welcoming, but you go into it and you realize that your hair isn't right, your body doesn't look the way it's supposed to look, you don't hang out with the right people, you're not going to the right clubs, and you feel really lost. So you latch on to anything that gives you some sort of worth. And people there are, doing drugs, and you kind of think that, maybe you have to do it as well to have fun.
Oh, you felt so powerful, you instantly felt good about yourself, you felt confident, and everything was hot, oh, it's great. It's a fabulous drug. I mean, you feel, great, and no matter how depressed you are, or how miserable you are, or how ugly the guys you are with, or how depressing your situation is, you'll feel good by default.
Makes you feel invincible, makes you feel like you're on top of the world, makes you feel all of your inhibitions are stripped away. You're just numb to all the pain. Anything that's bugging you, any insecurity, that's all just is washed away. I never did just one hit. I would start off with 2 hits. I always did a lot more than most people would do. Put it in front of me and give me a shovel.
Crystal, also known as crystal methamphetamine, is a psychostimulant. It's speed. Some of the street names for it are crank, redneck cocaine. It's called redneck cocaine because it's cheap. It's a really good drug if you don't have a lot of money. For $40, you can be high for 3 days.
Everybody would get all wound up, get all, all tweaked, and then go to these sex clubs. And I can remember going with a friend of mine who'd never been there before and was feeling really uncomfortable. And I just thought this was perfectly normal. And these parties would go on all night, most of the next day, and could go on for a couple of days.
Crystal also makes somebody very, 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 very horny. And so 1 partner, 2 partners, 3 partners, 4 partners is not enough. Sex needs to be constant and endless.
It's hot. The possibilities are endless. And you look around and you're hungry for it and you want that guy and you like sex. Then you're on to the next person. Sex. You want the best experience possible. And you're forever chasing that.
With crystal methamphetamine, it causes a huge increase in dopamine levels, much more than cocaine.
Crystal affects the brain. It affects the release of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. This is a pleasure neurotransmitter. So it makes users feel on top of the world because so much dopamine is being released in their brain.
It has a big affinity for brain tissue as opposed to cocaine. So it really tends to penetrate deep into the nervous system.
Somebody's high on crystal meth, they don't feel lonely. They don't feel depressed. They feel like they're the most beautiful, most hot, most amazing thing in the world. So when somebody's starting to come down from the high, somebody who's depressed to begin with, that depression and those feelings of loneliness get exacerbated. What's the quick and easy approach? The quick and easy approach is to do more crystal. And so that's how the cycle begins.
I went to a club and I had mixed crystal with GHB. I was dancing with this really beautiful, gorgeous Latin boy. And all of a sudden I just remember feeling like the entire world had fallen. Can't exactly explain it. It's like the roof fell on top of me, and so I fell down with it. My friends saw that, and of course you don't want to make a scene in front of everyone, so they dragged me out of the club, and then when they finally brought me into my friend's apartment, that's when they told me that I stopped breathing. They just punched my chest a bunch of times, and then eventually I started breathing again. And they were just looking like, are you okay? And then the next sentence out of my mouth was, yeah, I'm fine. I'm like, give me a bump. I need to wake up.
After doing this, over and over for a period of time, the crash you get from crystal meth is, just unbelievable. It's just like being thrown down into this black hole after you're way up in Oz.
I had started to see shadow people around me. I had started to have horrible nightmares at night. I had started to have my nightmares during the day when my eyes would be open. I wouldn't even have to be sleeping. I started seeing images of me killing other people, slashing their throats. I couldn't sleep anymore because I was too scared to sleep. I didn't want to stay awake because I'd hear more voices.
I would trash the house. I would just be completely irrational. I had met somebody, crystal meth, broke up the relationship. I didn't want it to break up. I knew it was coming. I knew it was going to be said to me that it was over. And he said it that day. I left the house. I went right to get Crystal. I went right to the bathhouse. And I was there for 2 days. If you associate sex and crystal meth, 9 times out of 10, you're not even going to think about a condom.
Pretty much by the time 12 or 1 a.m. passes by, basically as you go into the hours of the morning, people are all on crystal, and for the most part, all barebacking. What are you doing? You know, I'm negative. And everyone in the club at the time it was just a very dumb thing. It was very awkward because it's like, hello, welcome to the club. You know, we're all positive pretty much. You know, it's like catcher's call. You know, there's no lifeguard on duty. And I just realized I just was playing the odds game. I was really fooling myself.
After I did this risky behavior and I got clean and sober for a period of time, I went and was tested. And I would just remember praying, God, please don't let me be positive.
When I was going to get my HIV test, I was absolutely just completely and totally scared because I did not use condoms one single time, and I had nothing but unprotected sex.
It used to be that we just had the condom code. That was the first prevention message. Use a condom every time. We've gotten more sophisticated about that now and knowing that we need to tailor prevention messages to specific communities. But still, with Crystal now, we face a new challenge in HIV prevention specifically because Crystal and HIV go together.
There is a direct immunological effect of crystal methamphetamine on the immune system. You actually couple this with that intense change in behavior and hypersexuality and unsafe sex, and it just makes it so ripe, and that's why I think we see such efficiency of transmission.
Well, the test came back, I was positive. That whole weekend, I just, did coke, drank. All I cared about was escaping and doing my drug.
You have a higher chance of just doing any kind of risky behavior in general if you're on crystal. I myself did that all the time. I still to this day have no idea how I stayed negative. I really don't.
Within 2 months after going to a sex club for quite a few times, I know I was infected with HIV. Just within 2 months, all these lines I'd made for myself, were instantly crossed.
We're talking about a specific subset of gay men. Not every gay man in the United States is using crystal. Not every gay man in the United States is having anonymous sex. Not every gay man in the United States is going online and cruising for sex with people he doesn't know. But there is a subset of men who are.
So when you look at a group of people who's been stigmatized in our culture, and then you add on 25 years of the AIDS crisis, that's a powerful burden. And Crystal kind of wipes all those concerns away.
All of our young gay men, or even not so young gay men, that are actually recently infected with HIV, in almost all of our cases, it has been attributable to crystal methamphetamine. So, if that isn't an epidemic, I don't really know what is.
I was introduced to the intravenous aspect of it. 4, 5 injections a day. I lost my job was back in February of 2005. Things sort of spiraled downward ever since.
I called my mom to tell her why I defaulted on a student loan. And she was like, because I don't talk to her about this. She's very mad that I'm gay, and I told her that I was an addict 2 years ago, and she was like, oh, you're hurting me with that. You're hurting me, and I called her 2 days ago and told her, and she's like, so are you using the drugs? Which is very weird for her to hear her say, and I say, she says, I'll take that as a yes. And she goes, you're so much smarter than this. It's true. But is it?
Today is day 47 of my recovery. It has been a long 47 days. Here I sit telling this story from not only the perspective of, the recent history in 2005, but this is the second time I've done this. And I looked at my family and I said, I won't make it a third time. I can't do this again. I'm facing rebuilding my whole life again now.
So what day I went down the road for me? My sense of self back, my sense of normality back.
What happens when a creative approach to AIDS prevention falls out of favor with the government? Key sources of funding can suddenly disappear. 3 years ago, In the Life featured a community-based operation in San Francisco known as the Stop AIDS Project, as it struggled with this dilemma.
There have been a lot of questions around the work that we do.
Call them shocking, provocative, even outrageous. The Stop AIDS Project of San Francisco calls them effective. To Shana Krochmal, the organization's communications director, they're a blessing and a curse.
The audits and the investigations have been about politics and not about public health.
The Stop AIDS Project has been investigated twice in the last 2 years by the Department of Health and Human Services. Why? The organization's edgy approach to HIV prevention.
We know that 20 years into the epidemic, what it takes to catch the eye of a guy walking down Castro Street is liable to raise an eyebrow in Washington. That's okay. We're not here targeting safer sex messages for teenagers in, say, Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're here talking to the gay and bisexual men of San Francisco, and we know that it's important to be relevant. We have to look and sound like the men who we're trying to reach.
But the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention charges workshops with titles like Great Sex, Bootylicious, and Men for Hire actually promote sex. For an organization that receives federal funding, that's against the law.
There are certain restrictions put on our funding by the United States Congress. One of them, which specifically says that federal funds cannot be used to directly promote sexual activity, whether that's homosexual or heterosexual.
Dr. Ron Valdesari is Deputy Director of the CDC's National Center for HIV, STD, and TB Prevention. He says Stop AIDS has been investigated and audited, but he also acknowledges that in each case, the organization was cleared. Shana Krochmal calls the scrutiny harassment.
We need the CDC to talk straight to us, because we're going to talk straight about sex to people who need that information. And what we need to continue to be able to do the work that we're doing is a very clear and consistent set of guidelines about what they're going to have a problem with.
Some community-based organizations say Stop AIDS has become a lightning rod in a firestorm raging between liberal safe-sex messages and conservative ideology in the current administration. It's a war being waged on a number of fronts, including the question of what defines obscenity.
Our members are nervous, they're afraid, and they're also frustrated because they're not allowed to continue on their research that can help us gain the information that can make a healthy, informed decision based on science.
The New York Times broke the story. Certain words can trip up AIDS grants. Words like sex workers, men who sleep with men, anal sex, transgender, and gay. Several HIV researchers whose work relies on grants through the National Institutes of Health said they've been warned by government health officials to clean up their grant applications, purging such so-called sensitive language.
I've heard from individuals who work at organizations who receive grants from the government, who work in the field of sexuality or HIV/AIDS or any kind of advocacy that runs counter to the current administration's ideology, who have been subjected to additional audit and additional oversight.
And now Congress is getting involved. The House Government Reforms Committee's Special Investigations Division recently released a report entitled Politics and Science in the Bush Administration. It accuses the government of, quote, manipulating, distorting, and interfering with science in a number of instances, blaming in part a political and ideological agenda. Among the examples cited, quote, at NIH, officials have told scientists who study HIV and AIDS to prepare for political interference with their research. The White House issued a strong denial following the report, saying, quote, this administration looks at the facts and reviews the best available science based on what's right for the American people.
The epidemic has changed since 1981, and we have to change with it.
Back in Atlanta, Dr. Valdesari and others have recently released a new initiative focusing on those who are HIV positive. It's called Advancing HIV Prevention, or AHP.
The focus of the initiative is to reach out to those estimated 250,000 persons in America who are infected with HIV and don't know it.
The new program will make HIV testing a routine part of medical care in people considered at risk.
Our studies show that the majority of new infections in the U.S. are occurring from people who are infected with HIV and don't know it, and they're engaging in unsafe sex and other activities that transmit the virus. So what we want to do is work with these folks to get them diagnosed early. It's good for their own medical care. It's also very good from a prevention point of view.
Dr. Valdesari says the new strategy is backed up by sound science, but there's a problem. Like everything else, it costs money. Part of that money will come out of funding for prevention efforts aimed at those who are HIV negative. Efforts like condom distribution, clean IV needle programs, and educational workshops.
We're very concerned that, in 2003, the vision of public health is such a reductionist vision.
Ana Oliveira is executive director of the Gay Men's Health Crisis, a national leader in the fight against AIDS. She says the shift to a medical model emphasizing testing for HIV and treatment for those who test positive is fraught with problems, not the least of which is financial.
It really means that the government is announcing to us that we are shifting away from this other emphasis of community education, community prevention, and HIV negative prevention.
To fund AHP, the CDC plans to pull more than $35 million out of primary prevention programs.
We should be having major campaigns, billboard campaigns, subway campaigns, educational campaigns in schools. We should be having ongoing information giving around HIV and AIDS embedded in the lives of people, not just segregated out in some institutions, but on the daily lives of people, embedded in the daily lives of people.
In order to push for a balance between prevention efforts in those who are HIV negative and those who are positive, representatives of a number of community-based organizations met with Dr. Valdesari and other CDC officials. The result? An admission by the CDC that it was wrong in the way it announced the new AHP initiative.
Our communities are the experts. We built the AIDS movement. We built the AIDS infrastructure. We know what we're talking about. Now is the time for us to work in partnership with CDC.
Part of what we were hearing from those organizations is, CDC, you're presenting this initiative in such a way that you're inadvertently sending a message that you only care about people after they become infected with HIV. That was a pretty important message for us to hear because, first of all, that's not true. That is not where we're coming from, but we need to do a better job of communicating.
Dr. Valdesari says all this has nothing to do with politics or ideology and everything to do with accountability to the American public.
America in general is bored with AIDS, which is unfortunate. We're still talking about a deadly, incurable, sexually transmissible disease But most Americans think it's no longer a problem, and quite frankly, because they think that, they want to know what dollars are being used for.
Still, the question many LGBT and mainstream health organizations are asking is whether there's a common thread running through all three of these issues.
We can talk about diabetes. We can talk about cancer easier than we can talk about AIDS and HIV in this society.
The bottom line is that CDC is not backing away from working with community-based organizations like Stop AIDS. They are vital and necessary to a comprehensive approach to preventing HIV.
Stop AIDS could not agree more. They're not letting up on the work that is their mission and their passion, and their safe sex messages will continue as is. Messages like HIV is no picnic, to drive home the ravages of risky behavior. And despite what she sees as a campaign of intimidation, Shana Krochmal says that her program will continue to cooperate with the federal government.
We're not chasing a money trail. We're not here to get more bucks out of the federal government or to cheat the taxpayers. We are here to help people save their lives and save the lives of the friends and lovers who they care about.
6 months after this segment was initially broadcast in 2004, the Stop AIDS Project lost all of its federal funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But the project's success in raising private funds allowed its innovative outreach to continue. I'm Wilson Cruz. For all of us at In the Life, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month. Funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, and these funders, and the annual support of In the Life members like you.